What's up everyone, Drew here. After about 3 hours of struggling to log in the friggin' game, I finally made a DK in the War Within beta so I can test out the new hero trees and talent builds for PvP. We got lots of big changes coming, and not just talents being moved around and reworked. We got new spells and effects, and old ones making a comeback. Biggest news of all, Ray's Abomination is back! Oh, I thought he was gone for good, but my prayers have been answered! But more into that later. For this video, we're going to take a look at what I think could be the best spec and hero tree combinations for RBGs and BG Blitz, but mostly RBGs. Specifically, we're looking at Rider of the Apocalypse as an Unholy DK, Deathbringer as Frost, and Sand Lane as Blood. Now, obviously, this is beta, and everything we go over is susceptible to change, so just bear that in mind as we go along. Okay, let's get into it. Starting off, we have Unholy DK, and the hero tree options are Rider of the Apocalypse and Sand Lane. If you saw my previous video, then you already know I think Rider of the Apocalypse vastly outshines Sand Lane for PvP because it has more utility. What Rider of the Apocalypse does is that spending runes has a chance to summon one of the 4 horsemen for 10 seconds, each with a different ability. Mulgrain casts a Death and Decay that follows him, and you gain all the benefits you would get from standing in your D&D while standing in his, such as Unholy Ground talent, for example. Whitemane casts a stacking Shadowfrost dot called Undeath that spreads to other enemies when you hit them with Scourge Strike or Obliterate if you're Frost. Trollbane casts a Chains of Ice that slows and increases damage on the target, and it also shatters when you Scourge Strike or Obliterate the target, causing AoE damage that slows. And Nazgrim increases your strength while he's active, which grows even more when you kill a target and spend runes. But a lot of people were looking forward to this talent tree because of the On a Paler Horse talent in this choice node here that lets you mount your Acarus Death Charger in combat while outdoors. It says Acarus Death Charger, but when you try to mount it with the talent active, you get this mount instead, which I'm not complaining, it looks cooler to me. And you might be thinking this is an auto pick for PvP, but as it turns out, this talent does not work in arenas and battlegrounds, which makes sense because balancing this thing would be a nightmare. So the auto pick for PvP in this choice node is Death Charge. It turns your Death's Advance into the Paladin Divine Steed ability, but it also breaks movement and pairing effects and makes you immune to slows, forced movement effects, and knockbacks. It's basically Death's Advance, Divine Steed, and Blessing of Freedom all in one. For the next choice node, we have Horseman's Aid, which makes your horsemen cast a slightly weaker AMS on you and themselves, which you can only benefit from every 45 seconds. The other choice talent is Pact of the Apocalypse, which redirects 5% of the damage you take to each active horseman. I was concerned if the horsemen were easy to kill, like Shadow Fiend or Observer, but they're elite mobs, so they can't be killed easily. For RBGs, I think I'm gonna go with Horseman's Aid, but we'll see. For the last choice node, we have Fury of the Horseman, which makes every 50 runic power you spend extend the duration of your active horseman by 1 second, up to 5 seconds, which is fine, but I think a Feast of Souls is better. While you have at least 2 horsemen active, your runic power spending abilities deal 30% more damage, which I think synergizes better with the bottom talent, Apocalypse Now. It makes Army of the Dead or Ray's Abomination and Frostworm's Fury summon all 4 horsemen for 20 seconds. We also have Hungering Thirst, which increases the damage of your diseases and Death Coil or Frost Strike if you're Frost, and Mossworn Menace, which increases Scourge Strike and Obliterate damage and decreases the cooldown of Death and Decay by 10 seconds or Defile by 5 seconds. Now let's look at the class tree. I'm not going to go over every single tiny detailed change. I'm just going to go over the changes that I think stand out and the new talents. So I'm speccing into this as if I'm running the Defile build. Defile was recently changed, but we'll get into that later. So Death's Reach and Grip of the Dead are now separate talents instead of being on the same choice node, so if you want both, you can. As for the new talents, let's start off with Ice Prison. It turns Chains of Ice into a root, but it gives Chains a 12-second cooldown. Not being able to spam Chains is terrible. This talent is terrible, do not take it. Suppression reduces AoE damage, which gets further reduced when suffering a loss of control effect. Osmosis makes your AMS increase healing received. Runic Protection increases your armor and reduces the chance you'll be critically struck. Subduing Grasp reduces the target's damage dealt to you when you pull them. It works for Death Grip and Gore Fiend's Grasp, but it does not work for Abomination Limb. I don't know if that's intentional or not, because I mean, you're pulling them, so I would assume it would work, but whatever. Null Magic reduces magic damage taken and reduces the duration of harmful magic effects by 35%. That is pretty good. Unyielding Will makes your AMS remove all harmful magic effects when activated, but it increases the cooldown by 20 seconds. I don't think that's a good trade, so I'm not taking it. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Vestigial Shell makes casting AMS give 2 nearby allies a lesser AMS that reduces the duration of harmful magic effects against them by 50%. For the Unholy tree, 2 things stood out to me the most. One is, like I said before, Raise Abomination is back, and it's no longer an honor talent. I wish it was a choice node with Army of the Dead instead of being under it and replacing it, but I'm fine with this. Army's cooldown is also 3 minutes long instead of 8, and Death Coil no longer reduces the cooldown, but Raise Abomination is an auto pick anyway because summoning all 4 horsemen every minute and a half is way better than every 3 minutes. But Raise Abomination did get a nerf. It's small but significant. You used to be able to choose where your A-bomb spawns, which was great for fishing out stealthies and stopping rogues from capping bases, but now when you press the button, he just pops up next to you. The other change that stood out to me was with Defile. It got a 200% damage increase, but it no longer gives you a stacking mastery buff, which is a pretty big nerf. But it's still a handy AoE slow when paired with Grip of the Dead. Magus of the Dead and Ruptured Viscera no longer share the same choice node, so you can take both if you want, but I don't think Ruptured Viscera is worth taking, even though having your ghouls explode sounds pretty metal. Ebon Fever and Bursting Sores were also separated, so you can take both of those talents if you want. And we also have new talents. Foul Infections increases dot damage and crit chance. Unholy Blight is no longer a spell. Now it's a passive that surrounds your ghoul instead of you when it's paired with Dark Transformation, so that's one less button you gotta press. Festering Scythe is an AoE big hit that replaces Festering Strike for every 20 Festering wounds you burst. That's a lot of festering. Menacing Magus is basically the Dragonfly tier set. It makes your Magus of the Dead shoot bolts at multiple enemies. Summon Gargoyle now shares a choice node with this new talent, Doomed Bidding, which summons a Magus of the Dead every time you use a sudden Doom proc. As much as I love summoning a super hot Valkyrie changed from the Gargoyle, the 3-minute cooldown is awkward to play around, so Doomed Bidding would be my choice if I'm picking this node. Decomposition gives Virulent Plague a chance to flare up and deal 50% of the damage it dealt in the last 4 seconds, and also extends the duration of your active minions when it triggers. While this is the build I would run, if I were to not run Defile, it would probably look something like this. Or this. Again, we're not going to know definitely until Season 1 starts. Anyway, let's move on. For the PvP talents, Necrotic Wounds and Doom Burst are still auto picks. However, Strangulate was changed. The silence effect was increased by 1 second and its cooldown was reduced, which is good, but now it replaces Asphyxiate. That's not a big deal for Frost DKs because they already have 2 AoE stuns, but for Unholy and Blood, that's a pretty big nerf. I still think I'm going to take Strangulate for most situations. If not, maybe Spell Warden or Necromancer's Bargain. No, you cannot take Necrotic Aura, it's being removed. For the weapon enchant, I'm most likely going to use Fallen Crusader, but Root of the Apocalypse got buffed, so maybe we'll see some play with that. And that was Unholy Rider of the Apocalypse Unholy DK. Now let's take a look at Frost. Frost Death Knights can choose between Deathbringer and Rider of the Apocalypse. While I think Rider of the Apocalypse offers more utility, Deathbringer synergizes with the burst playstyle of Frost, and it might be worth taking over Rider if the damage from Deathbringer is high enough. So I went about making this talent build as if that's the case. Deathbringer is the only DK hero tree that gives you a new button to press, Reaper's Mark. When you hit an enemy with it, it applies a stacking debuff that increases each time you deal shadow or frost damage and explodes after 12 seconds or when it reaches 40 stacks. Reaper's Mark also travels to an unmarked enemy when the target dies, or explodes below 35% health when there are no enemies to travel to. Supplementary talents include giving Reaper's Mark a bunch of AoE damage that crits and reduces physical damage you take, additional Shadow Frost damage with Frost Fever or Blood Plague, more Reaper's Mark stacks from Shadow Frost damage, having Rime-empowered Howling Blasts or Blood Boil deal Shadow Frost damage, and the Reaper's Mark explosion applying Soul Reaper to targets below 35% health. The bottom talent, Exterminate, makes it so that after Reaper's Mark explodes, your Obliterate, or Marrow Rend, costs no runes and summons 2 scythes to hit your enemies. The first scythe strikes your target and has a chance to apply Reaper's Mark, while the second scythe hits enemies around the target. And we have 4 choice notes to pick at. This one on the bottom left has Swift End, which reduces Reaper's Mark rune cost by 1 and the cooldown by 15 seconds. And Painful Death, holy crap, that name is metal, increases Reaper's Mark damage and makes the Exterminate effect empower your next 2 Obliterates instead of 1, but now reduces its cost by 1 rune instead of it costing no runes. And it gives the bottom talent Exterminate a 30% chance to apply Reaper's Mark. I went with Swift End because I figure a cheaper and more frequent Reaper's Mark is better, but having Reaper's Mark as a 45-second cooldown does align with Pillar of Frost's 45-second cooldown if you take Ice Cap. A little food for thought. In this choice node in the middle, we have Dark Talons. Consuming Killing Machine or Rhyme, or using Malrend and Heartstrike if your blood, has a 25% chance to increase the stacks of an active Icy Talons by up to 2 stacks, and your runic power spending abilities count as Shadow Frost damage while Icy Talons is active. The other choice, Wither Away, causes Frost Fever and Blood Plague to deal their damage in half the time, and Exterminate Second Scythe also applies Frost Fever or Blood Plague depending on your spec. I went with Dark Talons because I figure more Shadow Frost damage means more stacks for Reaper's Mark. The last 2 choice nodes are defensives. In this first one, we have Pact of the Deathbringer, which casts Death Pact on you at 50% effectiveness when you get hit for 25% of your health in one damaging effect. It can only occur every 2 minutes, and when Reaper's Mark explodes, the cooldown of this effect and Death Pact are reduced by 5 seconds. The other choice, Rune Carved Plates, reduces magic damage for every rune you spend and reduces physical damage for every rune you generate for 5 seconds up to 5 times. I went with Rune Carved Plates mainly because I didn't pick Death Pact in the build I was running. And the final choice node, we have Death's Messenger, which reduces the cooldown of Lichborn and Raise Dead by 30 seconds, and Expelling Shield, which reduces enemy cast speed by 10% for 6 seconds when they deal direct damage to your AMS. I think they're both okay, but I went with Expelling Shield because I wasn't sure if I was going to take Unholy Endurance or not. Speaking of which, when we look at the main DK tree for Frost, you'll notice I swapped some points around since I don't have to build for Defile. For the Frost tree, I'm building this as if I'm using a 2-handed weapon. For the new talents, we have Cryogenic Chamber, which makes it so each time Frost Fever deals damage, 15% of the damage dealt is gathered into your next Remorseless Winter cast up to 20 times. Arctic Assault has you fire a Glacial Advance whenever you consume Killing Machine. This, along with Avalanche, stacks the Razor Ice debuff on your enemies, so you get the benefits of Rune of Razor Ice without having to enchant it on your weapon. Smothering Offense increases auto attack damage by 10%, which increases further for each stack of Icy Talents you have, and it can stack up to 2 additional times. Icy Death Torrent gives your auto attack crits a chance to deal additional damage to enemies in front of you. The Long Winter makes your auto attack crits increase your Pillar of Frost duration up to 6 seconds. I had to Google how to pronounce this word. Hyperpyrexia gives your runic power spending abilities a chance to deal additional damage over time. And finally, Shattered Frost makes it so when you consume 5 stacks of Razor Eyes from the Shattering Blade talent, it also does AoE damage. I think you're more likely to take Shattering Blade and Shattered Frost if you're dual wielding. Chill Streak now bounces off of you if there's no enemy target around. No, it does not damage you. Ice Cap was changed. Now it just reduces your Pillar of Frost cooldown by 15 seconds. And for PvP talents, I'd go with Dead of Winter all the time. The other 2 would probably be Strangulate and Delirium. For the weapon enchant, if I'm playing 2-handed, I'm going with Fallen Crusader. If I'm dual wielding, I'd have Fallen Crusader and Razor Ice along with the Shattering Blade and Shattered Frost talents. But another interesting change is that Stone Skin Gargoyle can now be used on one-handed weapons. What that means is if you're dual wielding, you can have Stone Skin Gargoyle on one weapon, Fallen Crusader on the other, and Razor Ice from Arctic Assault and Avalanche, which basically gives you 3 rune enchants on one character. I don't know if that's going to be good, but we'll see. Lastly, we have Sandlane Blood DK. Blood can also choose Deathbringer, but I think most Blood DKs are going to choose Sandlane for RBGs because Blood doesn't really care about dealing burst damage as much as trying to stay alive as long as possible so they can grip people away from team fights, spin bases, disrupt offense on flag maps, that kind of stuff. And Sandlane complements that playstyle more because it has more self-sustain. At least it seems that way. It's centered around Vampiric Strike. Your Death Coil and Death Strike, and Epidemic if you're Unholy, have a 10% chance to turn your Heart Strike or Scourge Strike into Vampiric Strike. It heals you for a percentage of your health and grants you a haste buff called Essence of the Blood Queen. Supplementary talents include Blood-Soaked Ground, which reduces physical damage taken and increases your chance of gaining Vampiric Strike when you're standing in your Death and Decay or Defile. Frenzied Bloodthirst gives Essence of the Blood Queen 2 additional stacks and increases Death Coil and Death Strike damage per stack. Blood is Life, which is the coolest talent in this tree, gives your Vampiric Strikes a chance to summon a Blood Beast for 10 seconds. Each time it damages an enemy, it stores a portion of the damage dealt, and when it dies, it explodes, damaging enemies and healing you for 50% of the damage that was stored. Insight Terror has enemies take increased shadow damage when you hit them with Vampiric Strike, Heart Strike, and Scourge Strike. Vampiric Strike benefits from this effect by 400%. The bottom talent is Gift of the Sandlane. While Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation is active, your Heart Strike or Scourge Strike is replaced by Vampiric Strike for the whole duration, and the effectiveness of your Essence of the Blood Queen is increased. Infliction of Sorrow makes it so when you use Vampiric Strike on an enemy with Blood Plague or Virulent Plague, it extends extends the dot duration by 3 seconds and deals 10% of the remaining damage to the enemy. When Gift of the Sand Lane ends, your next Heart Strike or Scourge Strike consumes the disease to deal 100% of the remaining damage to the target. And there's also Visceral Strength, which increases your strength for 8 seconds when you consume Crimson Scourge or a Sudden Doom. And we have 3 choice nodes. In this first one, we have Newly Turned, but we don't care about this talent because it buffs Ray's ally, which you can't use in PvP. So we're always going to pick Vampiric Speed. It increases the movement speed bonuses of Death's Advance and Wraithwalk, and when you activate either one, you increase the movement speed of 4 nearby allies by 20%. The next choice node has Vampiric Aura. It increases Leech by 2%, and when Lichborn is active, the effect is increased by 100% and affects 4 nearby allies. Not bad, but I'd probably go with Bloody Fortitude. It makes IBF reduce all damage you take by up to an additional 20% based on your missing health, and killing an enemy reduces IBF's cooldown by 3 seconds. In this last choice node, we have Pact of Sandlane. It stores half of all shadow damage you do into your Blood Beast, which explodes for additional damage when Blood Beast expires. And we have Sanguine Scent. Death Coil, Epidemic, and Death Strike have a higher chance to trigger Vampiric Strike when damaging enemies below 35% health. I think I'd go with Sanguine Scent. The Death Knight tree for Blood DK is probably going to look something like this. For the Blood tree, once again, we have some redesigns and new talents. Bone Collector makes pulling an enemy give you 1 charge of Bone Shield. Ossified Vitriol increases your Marrow Rend damage each time you lose a Bone Shield charge. Bloodied Blade increases your strength each time you parry an attack for 15 seconds. When it reaches 8 stacks, your next parry consumes all charges and unleashes a Heart Strike at 200% effectiveness and increases your strength by 10% for 6 seconds. And Carnage makes your Blood Drinker and Consumption contribute to your Blood Shield Mastery skill, and there's a chance Blood Drinker and Consumption cooldown gets reset when your Blood Shield is attacked. But what really caught my attention in this tree was the change they made to Tightening Grasp. It now silences enemies caught in Gorfiend's Grasp for 3 seconds. I don't often see Blood DKs run Gorfiend's Grasp in RBGs, but that might change. An AoE Grip Silence could be really good for setup or even just mitigating enemy offense. For PvP talents, I think Walking Dead and Spell Warden are auto picks. I'm not sure about taking Strangulate anymore because without Asphyxiate, you have no stuns. So the third slot might be Bloodforged Armor or Decomposing Aura or Last Dance. And the Runeforge enchant for Blood is going to be Sanguination. And that's all 3 DK specs and hero talents. So what are my final thoughts? I like the direction DK's going in. I really like the general DK talent changes and most of the Unholy changes. I'm disappointed you can't choose Ray's A-Bomb spawn location anymore because I love annoying the crap out of rogues and druids, but I'll take what I can get. I'm not too happy about Strangulate's change, but it is what it is. If Frost DK sees any play, I think Rider is going to be the preferred hero tree unless Deathbringer's damage is so busted it overrides the utility from Rider. And I don't know if the Blood DK AoE Grip Silence is viable in RBGs, but if it is, it would make me want to try it even more than I currently do. But what do you guys think of these builds and changes? Do you have different builds in mind? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm. You can follow me on Twitch where I'll be covering more DK PvP in the next expansion along with other classes. I hope you all have a great week and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.